On New Year's Day of 1878, in Stockholm, the air inside the newly built National Library is winter-dry clean enough that every footstep sounds deliberate. A crate is carried down a corridor not designed for ordinary books. It is handled the way you handle instruments. Not because it is delicate, because it is heavy enough to become dangerous when it shifts. Inside is the Codex Gigas, the giant book, a medieval manuscript moved like cargo, yet treated like a relic. The official record explains the transfer plainly. A national collection is consolidated. A famous manuscript is relocated. A building receives what a palace once guarded. The history is tidy on paper. The object is not. When the crate is opened, the scale changes the room. The boards are thick. The pages are taller than a human torso. The binding is not decorative. It is structural. A book engineered to resist time. And then an archival anomaly you cannot unsee once you know where to look. Missing leaves. Not lost in the casual way papers go missing, but cut out, removed by a blade that left behind a clean absence and a long question. Even the count of what is missing is not perfectly stable across modern descriptions. Some accounts describe 8 removed folios. Others describe 10 missing leaves. It is a small numerical disagreement that becomes, in an archive, a kind of static. Officially, the Codex is a product of monastic labor and medieval devotion. Visually, it reads like something else. A machine for storing and projecting authority text, ritual, law, memory scaled up beyond personal use. Outside, Stockholm stays frozen. Inside, dust floats through a beam of light, and the question lingers in a building meant to preserve the past without promising it would explain it. History remembers progress, but forgets what it replaced. By late March of 2009, in New York, a museum essay describes a practical fact that modern viewers often miss. Some manuscripts were never meant to be held. Choir books, graduals, and antiphonaries were made for communal worship. They were built large so that multiple singers could read from a distance, gathered around a lectern, following the same lines at the same time. The artifact anchor is not a single volume but the category itself, choir books with 4-line red staves, black square notation, and initials large enough to function almost like paintings. Their scale is described as functional, sometimes as wide as 3 feet across when opened. The official explanation is stable. Distance demands size. Group performance demands legibility. There is no documented contradiction here. The records, for once, align. Big books exist because the intended audience stands together. Yet the unease begins in interpretation because the architecture that hosts these books is also scaled for sound. The pages are not just readable, they are visible as a surface broad enough to catch candlelight like a screen. A human witness line survives not as a medieval diary, but as modern institutional description. These books were created for shared, communal worship, and their format follows that requirement. It is a simple statement. It lands like a measurement. The recurring motif begins softly. The hum of voices synchronized, one text, one tempo, and the first unresolved timestamp enters through the artifact itself. Most choir books are dated by ranges 14th century, 15th century, circa 1475 to 1495, not because scholars are evasive, but because parchment, script, and illumination style do not always submit to a single year. The archive gives you a window, not a point. That is not a conspiracy. It is how time looks when you approach it by fragments. In the present day, these same oversized pages are reproduced digitally, flat-lit and silent yet still arranged to coordinate bodies, now across screens rather than pews. The official story holds. The mystery is not that the books are big, it is that so many different institutions across centuries agreed that this scale was necessary. By the middle of the 13th century, an era most catalogues locate in Bohemia, the Codex Gigas is produced as a Romanesque Latin manuscript, famous today as the largest surviving medieval illuminated manuscript in its category. It is roughly 92 centimeters tall, and modern descriptions emphasize what your hands would learn instantly. It is not portable in the way books are supposed to be. Officially, the Codex is a monastic object, a Bible and additional texts in Latin, compiled within a learned religious environment. Its later history is documented through institutional custody. It appears in Prague collections, then becomes war booty during the 30 Years' War, transferred to Stockholm, remaining in Swedish custody thereafter. The archival tension is not fabricated, it is physical. Some leaves are missing, and the removal looks intentional cutting rather than loss. The purpose is not settled in the public record. Even the count varies across descriptions, a contradiction small enough to be dismissed, but persistent enough to be felt. A human witness line arrives through the institutional voice of preservation. The Codex's history is recorded as movement between regimes and collections, language that is factual, but cannot help sounding like a verdict. The recurring motif sharpens, missing pages as missing frequencies, a silence where a rule, a ritual, or a system might have been. The contradictory timestamp emerges through the Codex's own biography. Its medieval production is placed in broad terms, but its movements are pinned to sharp dates: 1648 to 1649 for wartime transfer, 1878 for relocation to the National Library building. A manuscript dated by centuries is then handled by calendar days, as if bureaucracy is trying to make the medieval behave. The modern link is visible in the way institutions display it. Glass, controlled light, climate systems, an object originally built for human ritual now preserved as national property. If one treats alternative historical frameworks as serious interpretive lenses rather than claims, the Codex becomes a tempting data point, a knowledge object engineered beyond private devotion, scaled toward collective use, then moved between empires like strategic material kept, renamed, and partially emptied. The archive does not prove that. It only shows the outline where proof would have to sit. In 1660, in the Netherlands, a different species of giant book is produced, the Clanker Atlas. Its official story is overtly political. It is offered as a gift to Charles II of England, meant to impress a book as ceremony, a book as diplomatic object, a book as proof that paper can carry empire. The artifact anchor is measurable. Descriptions emphasize its immense dimensions, taller than a person, and when opened, wide enough that it stops being a book and becomes a surface. The numbers are not perfectly stable across modern summaries. Some measure the open spread, some the closed boards, some classify it by category. The disagreement is not scandalous, but it is real. Even famous objects generate unstable paraphrases. The official archival path is similarly clear. It enters royal possession, later is donated into public custody as part of the King's Library, and today is held by a national institution. A human witness line can be taken from the practical way curators translate scale into bodies. It takes multiple people to carry it. The observation repeats because it is the simplest way to make the size intelligible. The recurring motif shifts from chant to cartography, an empire's hum rendered as inked coastlines. The unresolved timestamp appears in the atlas's long dormancy, created in 1660, held privately as a curiosity, then publicly exhibited in a modern sense centuries later, an old object with a public life delayed by generations. There is no need to invent erased blueprints here. The official record already contains attention, knowledge concentrated in elite rooms. A giant book that cannot be casually used becomes, by design, a controlled interface. Under an alternative historical lens, the Atlas reads like a prototype of a different kind of infrastructure, an engineered display system. A map too large for one person is not for one person. It is for a room, for a ritual, for synchronized attention. And once you see that pattern rooms, rituals, synchronized bodies, you begin to reread the giant book as a technology of coordination, not merely a curiosity. If history is written by survivors, who erase the rest? In 2019, in Boston, a library blog post announces a modern event digitization, but the language used to describe the objects feels older than the machines that photographed them. 2 choir books associated with San Sisto are presented as gigantic volumes, built with heavy wooden boards and protective metal elements, designed to be placed on a lectern and used in daily worship. Their size is translated into ordinary units, approximately 2 feet tall, weighing nearly 40 pounds. The artifact anchor is explicit and visual, illuminated pages with music, bindings reinforced like armor. Here, The archival anomaly is not missing leaves, but a different kind of return. Scholarly attention focuses on a signed and dated Illumination, a scene on folio 48 signed by Don Nicolaus, dated 1475 inside a set, broadly described as 1475 to 1495. A clean date nested inside a date range, certainty embedded inside approximation. A human witness line is, unusually, literal, the signature, Don Nicolaus, tied to a date. It is not a romantic diary. It is a mark in paint and ink, one human insisting on being counted. The recurring motif becomes audible again. The idea of a guide on a lectern text as conductor, page as tempo. The contradiction is not fabricated. It is structural. Why does one volume hold a pinned year while the wider object lives in a fog of circa? Because archives preserve in layers. A single page can be dated, while the compilation process remains broader made, expanded, repaired, rebound, migrated. The present-day link is explicit. Digitization creates a new surface pixel light replacing candlelight, yet the scale remains. These pages still demand a wide view. They were built to be read by bodies arranged in a particular geometry. If suppressed technology is understood as the suppression of methods rather than artifacts, the choir book is not just religious. It is an instrument for synchronization. Many voices made to behave like one machine, and the architecture around it, stone vaults, domes, turns voice into resonance. We do not need to claim a lost civilization to admit the technical reality. These systems were designed. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, a blunt observation appears in manuscript commerce. Complete choir book codices are rare. Single leaves and cuttings are not. The fact is often presented without theatre, but the implication is heavy. It means many giant books did not survive as books. They survived as fragments, miniatures separated from their musical and liturgical context because the image is easier to sell than the whole. The artifact anchor here is not an intact volume, but the idea of the detached leaf, the illuminated initial removed from a choir book that once controlled the singing of a room. The archival tension is documented in the marketplace reality itself. Leaves and cuttings are common. Codices are scarce. It is a quiet confirmation of a long process of disassembly. A human witness line must be handled carefully. We do not invent a monk's lament. Instead, we listen to what modern descriptions admit indirectly. The leaf exists because someone cut it out, and because someone else valued it more as an image than as part of a functioning system. The witness is the trade, which speaks in availability. The recurring motif becomes harsher, the sound of a blade through vellum silence produced by commerce. The unresolved timestamp appears in the afterlife of these pages. A choir book created in the 15th century can become a framed object centuries later, severed from its date range, displayed like an artwork from nowhere. The archive often cannot name the exact day the cut happened. It can only show that it did. The present-day link is uncomfortable. Digital collections attempt reconstruction, reuniting pages virtually, but the physical system is gone. A book meant to coordinate sound is scattered. Now it coordinates metadata. In an alternative historical reading, this pattern resembles a familiar kind of erasure. Not burning the whole library, but atomizing it until no one can easily use it as a system again. Not a single villain, just incentives, institutions, and time. And the question shifts. What knowledge was embedded in the whole that becomes invisible when only images remain? At the level of public description, giant books have a recurring quirk. The numbers do not always match. The Codex Gigas is described at roughly 92 centimeters in height, yet different modern summaries disagree on how many leaves are missing and what those leaves might have contained. The Clanker Atlas is described with different measurements depending on whether one measures the open spread, the closed cover, or the method of classification. The disagreement is not scandalous, but it is real. The artifact anchors are the same objects as before, but now viewed through a forensic lens. The archive does not behave like a ruler. It behaves like a chorus of descriptions. There is no need to invent missing catalogues. The anomaly is already visible in plain language. Even famous objects generate unstable summaries. A human witness line can be taken from the way institutions translate the problem into bodies, multiple people to carry the atlas. a manuscript heavy enough to be moved like furniture. These are the witness statements of curators and librarians, practical rather than dramatic. The recurring motif becomes static, the hiss between two radio stations, facts almost aligned, but not perfectly. The contradictory timestamp appears in the way modern descriptions refresh. Older sources say one thing, newer ones nuance it. Public knowledge shifts as scholarship refines. The object stays still, the description moves. The present-day link is immediate. Digitization and online access increase visibility, but also multiply summaries, more voices, more paraphrases, more drift. If suppressed knowledge exists, one of its safest hiding places is not a locked vault, but the blur of close enough. When a system is described approximately, its engineering disappears. Precision is a form of respect. Approximation is a kind of forgetting. The audience is left with a calm, factual discomfort. What else do we accept as basically true because the object is too large to hold in the mind all at once? By the 15th century, in Italy, an antiphonal can be catalogued at dimensions already massive compared to personal prayer books filled with chant notation intended for a group. The artifact anchor is explicit in that cataloguing logic. Large format vellum folios, chant staff lines, initials designed to read at distance. It is a technology of legibility. The official story remains consistent. Communal worship. No documented contradiction is required. Yet a tension emerges when you place the artifact back into its architecture. The book is not just content, it is a visual signal placed at the center of a room. It establishes where bodies stand, where eyes face, when voices rise, how long they sustain a note. It is, in effect, a control surface. A human witness line appears in the institutional statement of purpose. These books were made large so that several choir members could use them at once. It is a modern educational voice, but it describes an old engineering requirement. The recurring motif locks in, repetition, call and response, patterned sound. The unresolved timestamp returns through date ranges. Many of these manuscripts resist a single year, reflecting production over time, workshops, additions, repairs. A book is not always a moment. Sometimes it is a process. The present-day link becomes almost eerie. Modern crowds gather around a different lectern museum, cases, library displays. Digital viewers. The posture persists. People stand together and look at a giant page. An alternative interpretation does not need giants to explain the giant book. It needs systems. If architecture and sound once formed a unified design language across regions, then oversized books could be part of that language. Manuals, scores, or calibration surfaces for resonance rituals that official history describes as devotional. The archive cannot certify that, but it can confirm the physical truth. These books were built to govern a room. If history is written by survivors, who erased the rest? By the later Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, the choir book sits at the intersection of two technologies, manuscript production and acoustic architecture. This is not a cult. It is physics and design voices in a reflective chamber, sustained notes interacting with vaulted ceilings, harmonics lingering after the mouth closes. The artifact anchor returns to the choir book page. Red staves, black notation, initials built like miniature paintings. The large format is explained as functional. It is sized for communal use. There is no documented contradiction in this chapter. The records remain consistent. The mystery is interpretive. Why does the large format solution recur so insistently across centuries and regions? A human witness line appears as a signature again, Don Nicolaus, 1475, because it anchors the technical system to a person who lived inside it. The recurring motif becomes a measured hum. Note, pause, echo, decay. The contradictory timestamp is subtle but present. A manuscript dated broadly contains a pinpoint year. The system contains both the long and the precise like architecture that stands for centuries, built by hands that worked day by day. The present-day link, digitized choir books are silent. They preserve the score but not the resonance environment. The technology becomes image. An alternative framework invites a careful question. What if the large format book is not only for reading, but for calibration? A surface large enough to be seen by many could also be a surface used to synchronize many visually and acoustically within a designed resonant space. This is not a claim of lost energy devices. It is a suggestion about coordinated systems, architecture, sound, text, and collective attention operating together. And if that is true, then dismembering choir books, cutting them into leaves, does not merely destroy art, it destroys a machine. The Codex Gigas is not famous only because it is large. It is famous because it holds together. It is thick, bounded by boards, built to survive movement through violent history from Prague to Stockholm as war booty, then through institutional transitions into modern preservation. The artifact anchor is the Codex's physicality. Parchment folios, massive boards, a binding that behaves like architecture. The archival anomaly returns, missing leaves, removed at an unknown time, leaving uncertainty about what was once included. The contradiction is real. Modern descriptions vary on the count. A human witness line is the institutional chronicle of survival. The Codex is documented as held and preserved as a national object, its custody described with the calm tone of administration. The recurring motif becomes tactile, the sound of a heavy page turning like fabric, like leather, like a door. The unresolved timestamp is the removal itself. We can date wars and transfers. We cannot easily date a knife. The archive has calendar points for empires, but only a blank for the moment someone decided pages should vanish. The present-day link. Modern conservation treats bindings as engineering problems, humidity, strain, light exposure. The book's technology becomes explicit again under the hands of preservation staff. If suppressed knowledge exists in this story, it may not be the content of the missing leaves alone. It may be the method of constructing such objects at scale, the workshop discipline, the supply networks, the standardization that allowed giant books to be produced repeatedly across regions. Not giants, systems. And systems are exactly what fragments conceal. The Clanker Atlas's scale is not simply indulgence. It is performative. It belongs to the world of royal collections, spaces where knowledge is displayed as proof of reach. It is recognized as an extraordinary engraved atlas with immense dimensions. The artifact anchor is visual, the world rendered as a grid, coastlines stabilized into ink. The archival tension is not missing pages, but the way access is structured. A book that requires multiple people to move it already implies a gate. Not everyone can consult it. The book becomes a controlled interface knowledge that exists, but only inside rooms that permit it. A human witness line is again physical. It takes multiple people to carry. The body becomes the measurement tool for power. The recurring motif shifts to electromagnetic language not as mysticism, but as metaphor. The atlas is a field, a lattice, a mapping of space into ordered lines. The contradictory timestamp appears in its public visibility. Created in 1660, transferred into institutional custody later, publicly displayed in a modern sense, centuries after its creation. The gap itself is a kind of silence. The present-day link is digitization. The atlas becomes accessible on screens, flattened, turned into data liberated from physical gating, yet still dependent on institutional framing. An alternative reading treats maps not only as representations, but as artifacts of an older spatial intelligence, standardized surveying, geometry, grid logic. The giant atlas then resembles a command board, a room-scale instrument. No document proves that it was used as such, but the object's scale makes one conclusion unavoidable. It was built for collective viewing, not private study. Across categories, the giant book pattern repeats. Choir books meant for communal worship, monumental manuscripts treated as national treasures, massive atlases used as gifts and symbols. The artifact anchors stack like film cuts, a lectern-bound antiphonary, the codex behind glass, the atlas opened like a wall. There is no need to invent contradictions between continents. The documented pattern is enough. Different institutions, different centuries, different functions, yet the same solution emerges repeatedly. Make it bigger than one person. A human witness line is preserved in practical phrasing. created to guide monks through daily worship, created for communal use, created as a gift to mark political restoration. The recurring motif becomes cinematic, a flicker of light across gilded pigment, the low hum of a room full of voices, the dry rasp of a giant page turning. The unresolved timestamp is methodological. Scholars often date manuscripts by ranges. Institutions often summarize by single years. The same object can carry multiple temporal labels depending on the audience. The present-day link is the way the internet re-flattens these objects. A giant book becomes a scroll. The viewer swipes with one thumb and forgets the original scale. Under a serious alternative interpretive lens, the repetition begins to look like infrastructure. Large format knowledge devices used to coordinate groups, whether singers or courtiers, embedded within architecture designed to amplify presence. The archive cannot prove a unified global intelligence behind these designs. It can only show that, again and again, humans built books as if they were room machines. And that raises the question the official story never needs to answer. What does a civilization choose to scale up when it wants memory to behave? If history is written by survivors, who erased the rest? By the 19th century, libraries and museums become the final staging ground for many giant books, not because they were invented then, but because they were reclassified then. The Codex is moved into a new National Library building in 1878, becoming part of modern preservation, logic, temperature, cataloguing, controlled display. The artifact anchor is the crate again, an object that turns a medieval manuscript into a logistical problem. The archival tension is institutional, not conspiratorial. Giant books enter state custody through war transfer, royal donation, and consolidation. These are not secret pathways. They are state pathways. A human witness line is implied in the language of custody. Spoils and donation are polite words for violent transfer and concentrated ownership. The archive does not shout it, it files it. The recurring motif becomes radio silence. Official records grow more complete as explanations grow thinner. The more precisely the object is held, the less the system around it is remembered. The contradictory timestamp is the gap between event and narrative. A war becomes a museum label. A transfer becomes a line on a web page. Centuries of use compress into a paragraph. The present-day link is the visitor experience. Glass, lighting, a short wall text. The public sees the object, but not the procedural history that shaped what survived and what did not. Missing leaves, disbound pages, uncertain provenances. If erasure exists here, it may be structural. Institutions preserve objects, but compress context, not because they are hiding, but because they are curating, and compression is a kind of loss. In the present, the giant book returns to circulation in a new form, digitized, flattened, searchable. Pages become images. Access becomes instantaneous without restoring the sound of the rooms they once governed. The artifact anchor is a paradox. A giant object reduced to a screen, yet still visibly giant in proportion, the letters too large to feel ordinary, the borders too dense to read as mere decoration. The archival anomaly remains unresolved. The Codex still contains cut absences. The choir book tradition still carries the reality of dismembered leaves. The Atlas still embodies knowledge as furniture. These are documented conditions, not myths. A human witness line survives in the smallest form possible. A signature and a date. Don Nikolaos, 1475, proof that an individual hand once made contact with this scale. The recurring motif returns one last time, the hum of coordinated voices now imagined, because the archive does not store sound. The contradictory timestamp becomes the ending itself. A world that can date the transfer of a manuscript to a building on a specific holiday can still fail to date the moment pages were cut out. Precision and silence live side by side. The present-day link is architectural. Modern libraries and museums often echo the old logic: grand halls, domes, reverent lighting. The building becomes part of the message. Knowledge is monumental. You approach it quietly. If alternative frameworks are held as serious interpretive lenses without claiming proof, then the giant books become more than curiosities. They become traces of a civilization that repeatedly engineered knowledge objects at the scale of rooms. interfaces for synchronized reading, singing, mapping, and attention, not evidence of giants, evidence of systems. The final image is simple and factual. A page turns slowly, dust drifts through light, the text remains, the missing leaves remain missing, and the reel ends mid-frame right where an explanation would have begun.